So welcome everyone to DSLR Fast Start. My name is John Greengo, and today's class is on the Canon Rebel T3i, or as it's also known in other parts of the world as the 600D. And so this is kind of a replacement in some ways for the instruction manual. We're going to go through the camera, pretty much each and every button on the camera, and pretty much everything in the camera that you need to know about to operate the camera. So if you've recently purchased this camera or you're thinking about buying it, think of this as your live instruction manual to help you through it. So let's get started and show you what we're going to be doing today. I've broken this class down into several segments. We're going to start off with a little bit of product overview so that you know what you've gotten yourself into. There's a lot of people who have purchased this camera and it's their first digital SLR, might be their first Canon camera, so we're going to let you know a little bit about the history and kind of where it sits. We're going to go through some photography basics just to make sure everyone's up to speed on some of those fundamentals of photography. And then kind of the core of the class is where we're going to go through the button layout. We're going to go through the camera, top, back, side, bottom of the camera, and investigate all the buttons, dials, and controls on the camera to figure out exactly what they're for and how they're best used. We will take some little breaks as the day goes along, and then we'll get into the display system where we look at how the camera feeds you information. And then finally, we're going to go through the menu system where we're going to look at everything that the menu has to offer. And then at the very end of the day, we're going to put this all to use in practical terms in our camera operations section, which is kind of fun, where we get to set the camera up for different types of photography. And so I hope it looks good to you. I've tried to cover everything in this class, and so this is going to be a pretty complete class. We're not going to try to do it in 10 minutes. We're going to carefully walk through everything bit by bit. All right, to start with, when you get this camera, you get this gigantic instruction manual that I figure if you spend a couple minutes per page on, you're going to spend more than 10 hours reading that very boring piece of material. This class here is going to be about 4 hours in length. How is it possible for me to fit 4 hours in what is 10 hours of information? Well, I can't. I've had to kind of edit through and figure out some things that we need to spend more time on and other things that we need to spend less time on. One of the things I found out by going through these cameras is that they are partially designed for people who do not have access to or don't own a computer. If you need to do all your Photoshop processing in the camera, this camera has a lot of those abilities, and that's not how a lot of people use the camera. So I am going to breeze past some sections fairly quickly. I will mention pretty much everything, but I might say from time to time, check your instruction manual for more information. So there is still valuable information in that manual beyond what this class offers. Next off, this class is not a Photography 101 class. If you have never taken a photography class, I highly recommend that you do it. It's going to fill in a lot of gaps in your knowledge of photography. This is a class on how to work this particular camera. It's kind of assumed that you know a little bit about photography or that you're going to learn about it. And if you need to take a class, well, there'll be a class or two that I can recommend as we get into the class. So, that's where we are to get started with. So let's talk about the Canon T3i and what sort of product you have gotten yourself into if you have purchased this. Well, you've got yourself a Canon camera. And Canon is a great Japanese company that specializes in obviously making cameras, video cameras, lenses, a lot of different office products, and a lot of their own electronics that go in the cameras themselves. Now, Canon's been making cameras for a very long time. They were founded back in 1933, and look at this cute little rangefinder camera. That was their first camera, the Kawan 35mm rangefinder camera, because that was kind of the trend at the time, is rangefinder cameras. Nice, small, lightweight cameras that use 35mm film. And then in 1959, they came out with their first SLR, the Canon Flex. And this incorporated a single lens reflex style camera. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that more when we get to the photography basics. Then they started getting pretty serious about things in 1971 when they brought out their F1, a professional level SLR camera. And things were going along just fine until 1987. There was a bit of a bump in the road, you might say, with Canon, because they introduced the new autofocus system, and they introduced a completely new lens mount. And for all the serious photographers who had a large collection of lenses, it caused a bit of controversy because you had to buy a whole new set of lenses to work on these new cameras. And so they made this big leap of faith to the new system. And I'd have to say it paid off, because they designed a system for autofocus, and that would eventually be incorporated into the digital world. And here we have their first digital SLR in the year 2000, the D30, which, as I recall, sold for about $3,000 and had 3 megapixels to it. And we thought that was a wondrous invention at the time. And as I look at this picture of it, I think, wow, what a quaint little screen on the back of that camera. We were just so happy at the time just to be able to see our pictures instantly, and now the screens are so much larger and easier to see. But that was the state of the art at the turn of the millennium. And so that's a little bit about Canon's history. Now, as far as their SLR system goes, one of the great things about Canon that I really like a lot is they make a full range of cameras, from beginner to top-of-the-line professional, as well as several steps in between. As you grow and your needs increase as a photographer, there's probably going to be a Canon camera for you to upgrade to. The Rebel is a great place to start, and there's lots of room to grow. Canon also has many, many different lenses, a lens to fit virtually anything that you might need to do. So there's lots of great lenses, and we'll talk a little bit more about some specific lenses later in the talk. And then, of course, they have a very good flash system. If you need additional lighting for on-camera flash, macro flash, Canon has a very good selection of flashes as well. Now, as far as the T3i goes, it is what many people consider to be an upper entry-level camera. The Rebel is their entry line of cameras, and they do have a number of Rebels. For instance, the T3i, this one, came out in 2011. The T2i came out about a year ago, but most camera stores will keep the T2i in stock for quite a while. It sells for usually about $100 less and has a few less features. And here you can kind of see the timeline. And basically, they came up with a really nice design back in 2003, and they've been tweaking it and modifying it about every 12 to 18 months since then. And the difference between one model to the next usually isn't very much. As I say, just some small tweaking to each and every model. Now, the T1i, T2i, and T3i are the most current Rebel cameras, and there might be some people who are watching this that are owners of those older cameras, and you might wonder, how does this compare, or what's been the latest changes? As you can see here, between the T1 and the T2i, they've gone from 15 to 18 megapixels, but that stayed the same up to the T3i. And with the T1 and the T2, they've increased the frames per second, and they've increased the video capabilities, the frame rates, and the resolution. And finally, the T2i had an improvement in the metering system. When it comes to the T3i, probably the biggest difference is the articulating LCD screen on the back of the camera. Next up would be the wireless flash control. So if you have a Canon flash, you can have the built-in flash control this other flash without any cords at all, which is kind of nice. There's some additional help menus, and they've added some creative filters. And so I would say that the T3i is a minor improvement to the T2i, but I do think it is an improvement. So when you buy the camera, typically it is sold in a kit, and there's a couple different lenses that you can get with it. The 18 to 55 is probably the most common because it's the least expensive package. On our camera here today, which we have on a very generous loan from Borrow Lenses, thank you Borrow Lenses, we have a slightly upgraded 18 to 135 lens. And so this is giving us a little bit more telephoto range. It's a very good all-around lens. And so this might be a little bit larger than the lens you got with the camera if you got the 18 to 55. You're going to get some other little accessories in the package, mostly dealing with the battery charger, some cables, some instruction manual, and things like that. And so we're going to assume that you've already taken the camera out of the box and you've charged the battery and got the camera pretty much ready to go. In the instruction manual, there are page after warnings about dire things that you shouldn't do with this camera. You know, don't get it too hot, don't get it too cold, don't drop it, don't get it wet, don't take it apart, don't leave it by a giant magnet, don't store it with lots of corrosive chemicals, and one of my favorite, don't fire the flash at someone driving a car, don't use around flammable gas, and of course, don't swallow the battery. In essence, don't be stupid with the camera, and I think everyone understands those basics. But the question a lot of people do have is about this camera is not waterproof, do not get it wet. What do they really mean by that statement? Well, the camera is not waterproof camera. It doesn't have O-ring seals around all the openings, and there's lots of buttons and dials on this camera, so you want to be careful about getting water in those. We here at creativeLIVE in Seattle, we have a bit of rain from time to time, and when it's raining, I'm not too shy about going out and shooting. I don't leave the camera on a tripod out in the rain for an hour or two. I'm very careful. I try to keep it under a raincoat. Maybe I have a friend who has an umbrella. I try to stay under cover. If I need to go out in the actual rain and shoot, I do so very quickly and get the camera put away. I'll often have a cloth to mop up any wetness on the camera. If the camera does get wet, the camera may either die, where it needs to be sent back to Canon to be fixed, which could be expensive, or it may temporarily die, in which case the water just needs to dry out. If that's the case, what you want to do is you want to take and open every door that you can find on the camera. So you would take the battery out, open the battery door, you might take the memory card and the memory card door, you take the lens off, and then you just let the camera sit there in a nice, warm, dry environment and let it naturally dry. Many times in that case, the camera will come back to life and you'll be ready to go right again. And so be careful about getting it wet, but don't be too afraid about getting out there and taking a picture or two in a little bit of rain. The other thing that they say, they warn you about, is Canon is not liable for damage if used with non-Canon accessories. Part of this is, yes, true, because Canon wants to sell you their accessories, their lenses, their flashes, their batteries, and anything else that you might be able to hook up to the camera. In general, you're not going to damage the camera putting on a good quality aftermarket lens like a Tamron, Tokina, or Sigma lens, and there's a number of other brands as well that you can put on here, and it's not going to cause any problem with the camera. Now the camera may communicate back and forth with the lens to do some special feature, and if it has a lens it doesn't recognize on there, it won't be able to do that special communication. The batteries that go in here are Canon batteries. You can use aftermarket batteries. I've found they're not so good. They're not quite as reliable. They don't have as much power generally. Sometimes they don't feed as much information back to the camera as to how much power is left in the battery. And so I kind of tend to want to stick with the Canon batteries myself. And then as far as on the accessory ports on the side that we'll go through, there's a number of devices that you can hook up as far as remotes and so forth. And there's a lot of different brands that you can hook up that will not cause any problem at all. Be careful though about hooking up extra power units to the hot shoe on the camera. There's electronics that do hook up with the electronics of the camera there. I would tend to want to stay with the Canon flashes myself. Okay, so preparing the camera for today's talk. Let's hope that you have charged the battery. I know that we've charged our battery in here. That's going to take about 2 hours, and you're going to get anywhere from, say, 500 to 1,000 shots off the camera. It kind of depends on how you use your camera. Do you review every image? Do you use image stabilization? How much do you play around in the menus? How much do you turn the camera on and off? There'll be a lot of things that affect your gas mileage. Attaching the lens is pretty easy. I'll do this right here just in case anyone is not completely sure on this. We have a little white index mark on the camera as well as a red one depending on what type of lens that we're going to mount on this. This is an EFS lens that has a white mark, so we're going to match up that white square with the white square on the lens mount and just do a little turn until we hear a click. And that means the lens is properly attached at that point. The battery, I took this out before, but we'll just show it again. There's really only one way to install the battery, and these are, as I say, very powerful, last you for up to 1,000 shots or so. So we got the battery installed. In the memory card door, this uses SD memory. We'll talk a little bit more about this specifically in a little bit. I got a 4 gig card in here right now. There's only one way to put that in. It's spring-loaded, and the door closes pretty simply on that end. Take the lens cap off. We don't have a lens cap on here right now, but if you have yours, take your lens cap off, turn the camera on. There's a switch right on the top of the camera to turn on. And this may be the last time I tell you this, but go ahead and turn that big old dial on the top of your camera to the A+ little green auto zone. That's the simplistic auto mode. And at this point, go ahead and take a picture. So I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of Kenna because she's handling our web here. And just want to make sure that the cameras are working, that your camera is working. If not, this is a good time to go throw your battery on the charger, because we're going to head into some photography basics here in a moment. Now, one of the things to make this class a little easier to follow along with is pressing down on the shutter release will wake the camera up when it goes to sleep. And your camera likes to take a lot of naps. It tends to want to go to sleep after about 30 seconds to conserve the battery power. And what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to change this. So we're going to do something fairly sophisticated right now. And I'm going to switch over. Actually, I can't switch over at the same time. We're dealing with a new computer system here. So what you want to do is you want to turn the mode dial to M for manual up on the top of the camera. You're going to hit menu in the back of the camera. And you're going to need to navigate to the right to go to tool tab number 1. And what I want you to look for going down in there is the auto power off. And I want you to set that to 1 minute. That way, when you're playing with the camera, it doesn't suddenly die on you every 10 seconds. And this will enable you to follow along as we're going through the menu systems a little bit more easily. So take a moment to go ahead and do this right now. Okay, hopefully all of you have been able to switch that over. And we will be coming by this again towards the end of the class if you would like to switch this back to its original state.